What should these dealers do? They've paid for watches they can't sell since last year. But this video isn't for the dealers, it's for you, and it's about you avoiding watches dealers are trying so hard to get rid of. Some of these watches are genuinely the best things you'd slap on your wrist, but they aren't just selling. So, when you see these 12 watches, you have two choices. Run faster than the wind if you have to, or stay if the specifications appeal to you, but make sure you get the best deal. It all depends on what you intend to do with these watches when you buy them. If you are looking to collect and resell, watch this video to know the watches to avoid. And if you just want a fantastic watch for cheap, watch this video to know which ones you can get. That said, let us begin. Number 12. Zenith Defy Skyline Standard Blue. Picture a watch brand with a genuinely brilliant movement. 136 years old, El Primero, one of the greatest mechanical calibers ever made. And yet their flagship sports watch is currently trading at 30% below retail on Chrono 24, despite being new, in the box, with tags still on. The Defy Skyline launched in 2021 to real excitement. A sharp integrated case, that iconic star-shaped rotor visible through the dial, a price point around $6,000 that felt almost reasonable for what you were getting. For about 18 months, it worked. Collectors who couldn't get Royal Oaks were at least curious. Then the market stopped being curious. What happened to the Skyline isn't really a story about the watch, it's a story about overproduction. LVMH, which owns Zenith, pushed volume hard during the hype years. More units, more retailers, more availability. By 2024, you could walk into an authorized dealer almost anywhere in Europe and actually buy one. Which sounds like a good thing until you realize what widely available means in the watch world. It means the premium evaporates overnight. A collector who paid $6,000 for a Skyline in 2022 can get about $4,000 for it today. The dealers who stocked up expecting the Royal Oak alternative trade to last are now looking at trays of blue dials that nobody's picking up. The movement is still brilliant. The case is still sharp. The market doesn't care. Once a watch is everywhere, it becomes nobody's status piece, and in this industry, that's the only thing that actually matters. That's what happens when a good watch gets caught in a bad market. The next one on this list, the market moved. The brand refused to follow. Number 11. Panerai Luminor Marina 44mm Classics. Panerai built its name on one idea. Huge, Italian, military-descended cushion cases that looked like something a Navy diver pulled out of the Adriatic. For 2 decades, that idea printed money. The problem is, the people who loved that idea in 2004 are now in their 50s, and the people who are buying watches now, they want 38, 39mm maximum. Clean dials, slim profiles, something that disappears under a shirt cuff rather than announcing itself across a restaurant. The 44mm Panerai is the cargo shorts of the watch world, perfectly functional, technically correct, just deeply, visibly, out of step with where the culture went. Panerai has responded. They make the 38mm Luminor do now, and it's actually quite good. But the gray market is still full of the classics. Dealers who bought 44mm Panerais during the hype years at $20,000 can't find buyers at $13,000. Long-term owners are calling dealers expecting 2021 valuations and getting laughed off the phone. Here's the thing about Panerai that most people won't say out loud. The brand never really solved the problem of what its watches were. For once, dive watches stopped being worn by divers. When the brand is the entire personality of the watch, and the brand goes quiet, you're left with a very large, very polarizing chunk of steel that makes most wrists look like they're wearing a coaster. The 44mm will come back eventually. Everything cycles. But right now, dealers are sitting on them like they're holding property in a neighborhood where nobody wants to live yet. This is a great time for you to swoop in and get insane value. Panerai's problem is size. The next brand's problem is something far harder to fix. Number 10. IWC Big Pilot, the 46mm Heritage. The 43mm Big Pilot saved the line. Let's be honest about that first. IWC read the market, launched a more wearable version, and it works. That watch is selling. But the original 46mm Big Pilot Heritage, the one IWC produced for years, the one sitting in gray dealer inventories, the one long-term collectors are trying to offload, that watch is a different story. Trade-in values on the 46mm Heritage have dropped significantly. Owners who bought at peak are calling dealers expecting $12,000 to $13,000. Dealers are offering $8,000, sometimes less, and walking away when the owner says no. Those watches are then going home, going back in the box, and becoming a problem the owner doesn't know how to solve. The irony with IWC is that they make genuinely excellent pilot watches. The mechanisms are properly engineered, the dials are legible and honest, the brand has a real history with aviation. None of that matters if the case is wider than the average person's forearm looks good in. There's a collector in Frankfurt I read about on Watch You Seek who bought two 46mm Big Pilots in 2020. He said he felt like he owned two buildings he couldn't sell. He ended up trading them both to fund one Rolex Explorer, two watches, one watch, and he came out ahead. That trade-in calculus is the real story of the 46mm Heritage. It's not that the watch is worthless. It's that the people who own it have mentally moved on before they've physically let go. They know it's over. They're just waiting for the right dealer to offer something that doesn't feel like an insult. The IWC situation also reveals something true about the wider market. Watch values don't just track quality or rarity. They track consensus, the collective agreement that a thing is desirable. The 46mm Big Pilot had that consensus from about 2010 to 2020. Then, the consensus quietly moved somewhere else. The way a conversation at a party shifts, and you're suddenly talking to nobody. The watch didn't change. The room did. That's the 46mm story right now. People are escaping it, not buying into it. Big case watches have a problem, but the next entry has a problem money can't fix, even though there's a lot of it. Number 9. Hublot, Big Bang Unico Precious Metals. Hublot has always been loud. That was the point. Jean-Claude Bivet built the brand on the idea that luxury could be aggressive, that a watch could look like it was assembled from parts of a racing car and a jewelry box simultaneously, and that the right customer would pay serious money for exactly that feeling. For a decade, that customer existed in enormous numbers. By 2026, that customer has either moved on or is buying vintage. The Big Bang Unico in precious metals is perhaps the most extreme version of this shift. You're looking at watches that retail between $45,000 and well over $100,000 depending on the configuration. Yellow gold, sapphire cases, colored ceramic bezels in colors that were absolutely correct in 2015 and look a little exhausting now. Secondary market values on precious metal Big Bangs have dropped hard. A yellow gold Unico that retailed for $70,000 can be found on the gray market for $45,000 to $50,000. Some configurations are worse off. The quiet luxury shift that started in fashion leaked into watches around 2023. Understated, heritage. Nothing that announces itself before you enter the room. The Big Bang was specifically designed to announce itself before you entered the room. That used to be the attraction. Now it's the problem. Dealers with Hublot precious metal inventory are in a difficult position. The pieces are too expensive to sit on indefinitely, but the buyers who want them are fewer, and the ones who do appear are negotiating harder than ever. Hublot's problem is cultural. The next watch's problem is that it was created to solve someone else's problem, and that problem went away. Number 8. Bell & Ross BR05 Integrated Bracelet. The BR05 is actually a well-made watch. I want to say that clearly, because this isn't about quality, it's about timing and positioning. Bell & Ross spent years as an aviation-inspired brand, making square and round pilot watches. The BR05 was their attempt to enter the integrated sports bracelet conversation that Royal Oak and Nautilus had defined. The case and bracelet flow together, sharp angles, sporty but dressy. It launched in 2021, and it worked for about 2 years. The problem is that the integrated sport bracelet category is brutally hierarchical. If it's not a Royal Oak, a Nautilus, or a Vacheron overseas, the buyer at $5,000 or above starts asking uncomfortable questions. Who made this? What does it say about me? Will it hold its value? On that last question, the BR05 answers honestly. Probably not. Gray market premiums that existed in 2021 and 2022 are completely gone. You can find them at or below retail without much searching. For a brand trying to establish itself in a prestige category, below retail on the gray market is roughly the worst signal possible. Bell & Ross made a smart product decision. The market decided it had already assigned the seats at that particular table, and Bell & Ross wasn't at it. There's also a harder truth underneath this. The integrated sport bracelet trend that the BR05 was chasing has itself cooled. The buyers who drove that segment wild between 2020 and 2022 were partly collectors and partly speculators. People buying not because they wanted to wear something, but because they wanted to flip it at a premium before the momentum ran out. When the speculators exit, the prices don't just normalize. They often overcorrect in the other direction, because suddenly there's real supply, and the organic buyer base, the person who actually wants to wear a Bell & Ross every day, is smaller than everyone assumed. Forums like WatchCrunch have threads from frustrated BR05 owners asking why their watch, which was in demand in 2021, is now listed 3 times on the same Chrono 24 page at different prices and still not moving. The answer is that it was never in demand. It was in a slipstream, and slipstreams end. The woman who bought a BR05 as a graduation gift for her partner in 2022, thinking she'd found something sharp and appreciated, that watch is probably still in the box. Not because he doesn't like it, because he's scared to look it up. That watch lost the race before it started. The next one was supposed to be the safe bet and became anything but. Number 7. Omega Seamaster Diver, 300 meters Sedna Gold versions. The Steel Seamaster Diver 300M is one of the best-selling watches in the world. Reasonable price, gorgeous design, bond association that never fully dies. Nobody is worried about that watch. But Omega has a habit. This habit predates the current market correction and has gotten sharper since. They produce limited and special edition versions of that same watch in precious metals and two-tone configurations at prices that float between $25,000 and $55,000. Sedna Gold is Omega's proprietary rose gold alloy. It's genuinely beautiful. The watches that use it are technically impressive. But dealers who stocked Sedna Gold Seamasters during the hype cycle are discovering something uncomfortable. At that price point, the Omega name doesn't quite carry the same gravitational pull it does at $3,000. At $50,000, buyers start comparing the Seamaster to a steel Submariner, which costs less and holds its value more reliably, or to a precious metal Rolex, which at least carries a name that commands secondary market respect at that tier. The Sedna Gold Seamaster falls awkwardly between those two things. Omega's frequent special editions have also created a problem of choice paralysis in the market. There are simply too many variants, and too many of them end up on the gray market at reduced prices, which makes buyers nervous about buying any of them at retail. One gray market dealer told a WatchCrunch forum thread that his Sedna inventory was sitting 4 times longer than his steel pieces. He'd stopped ordering them. The honest observation on Omega's situation: they built a loyal audience at a price point where the brand made complete sense, then kept pushing into a tier where the brand name doesn't carry the same weight. That's not a product failure, it's a positioning failure. And positioning failures are slower and harder to fix than product failures, because you can't just redesign your way out. You have to wait for the market to reassign your value, and markets are stubborn about things like that. Omega's precious metal problem is partly self-inflicted. The next brand is almost entirely about price, and the math simply stopped working. Number 6. Girard-Perregaux Laureato Steel Blue Dial. In 2022, the GP Laureato was the answer to a question the entire watch community was asking. What do I buy when I can't get a Nautilus? The Nautilus waitlist was years long. Authorized dealers had none. The secondary market had gone insane. And there was this Girard Perregaux, beautiful octagonal bezel, integrated bracelet, proper in-house movement, steel blue dial that photographed stunningly, selling for about $12,000 at retail. Collectors started paying $20,000, $22,000, $25,000 on the gray market. Then, something happened that killed the Laureato's entire reason for existing. Royal oaks started appearing in boutiques. Not for everyone. Not easily. But for preferred clients, people with a purchase history, people the boutique knew, Royal oaks became obtainable in 2024 and 2025 in a way they hadn't been for years. The moment the actual thing becomes accessible, the substitute loses its entire premium. Gray market Laureatos that were trading at $25,000 fell back below retail. Not slowly, fast. Dealers who'd paid secondary market prices, $18,000, $20,000, couldn't sell them for $12,000. A watch bought as an investment while waiting for a Royal Oak had become a loss the moment the Royal Oak became available. There's an observation here that cuts sharper than the price data. The Laureato is a genuinely excellent watch, but it was never really being bought for what it was. It was being bought for what it wasn't. That's a fragile foundation for any asset. You're not buying the thing, you're buying the absence of something else. The moment that something else shows up, you own a watch instead of a position. And a watch needs to stand on its own. The GP was collateral damage from another brand's scarcity. The next watch made its own problems, one price hike at a time. Number 5. Breitling Chronomat B14, 2 full gold. The Chronomat has been Breitling's flagship since 1984. The B1 movement inside it is legitimately one of the finest chronograph calibers made anywhere, full stop. Breitling engineering is not the issue. The issue is price, and what price means when you're not Rolex. The full gold Chronomat B142 launched at a retail price approaching $40,000. At that number, the buyer is no longer shopping in Breitling territory. They're shopping in a category where the comparison is a steel Daytona, a steel Royal Oak chronograph, or a steel Nautilus chrono. All of which hold their secondary market value dramatically better, and all of which carry names with bigger gravity at that price point. Dealers are reporting Chronomat B, 1 gold pieces, sitting for over 200 days on Chrono 24. That's an eternity in a market where anything people actually want moves in under 2 weeks. The watch shows up at a discount, shows up again, drops a little more. The longer it sits, the more it signals to the market that something is wrong, even if nothing actually is. Breitling made a brand decision to push upmarket during the boom years. More precious metals, higher price points, editorial campaigns, borrowing the aesthetic language of haute horlogerie. The steel Chronomat and the Navitimer in steel? Selling fine. The precious metal play went directly into the correction and never recovered. The B1 movement deserves better. The market is indifferent to what movements deserve. Here's the thing I honestly keep wrestling with on Breitling. The brand is not making bad decisions in a vacuum. They looked at Rolex charging $30,000 for a steel Daytona and thought, correctly, that the market had proved customers would pay serious money for a sport chronograph. What they underestimated was how much of that willingness to pay was brand-specific. It wasn't that customers would pay $30,000 for a sport chrono. It was that customers would pay $30,000 for that sport chrono. Brand cachet, at that price tier, isn't transferable. You can't look at what Rolex is charging and decide that's proof of what you can charge. Rolex's pricing tells you about Rolex. It tells you nothing about Breitling at $40,000 in a correction market. The dealers who saw Breitling's gold push as a margin opportunity in 2022 and stocked accordingly are now the ones with the inventory problem. Some of them have moved to deeply discounting privately, not on Chrono 24, where a public price drop signals weakness to every future buyer, but through quiet conversations with regular clients. That's how you know the situation is genuinely uncomfortable. When dealers stop discounting publicly and start discounting privately, the panic has gone underground. Breitling pushed up market and found the ceiling. The next watch is a Rolex, and yes, even Rolex has a panic on its hands right now. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. You walk into a store or browse online, and everything looks the same, but behind the scenes, there's a system. Prices aren't always fair, availability is controlled, and one bad decision can leave you overpaying for something that doesn't even hold its value. That's why I created a complete free insider guide to buying watches. Inside, you'll find the best watches to buy, the watches to avoid, and how to choose a watch that actually fits your style and budget long term. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the free guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. Number 4. Rolex Sky Dweller Two-Tone Rolzor. Saying a Rolex is in trouble feels almost like a contradiction. Rolex doesn't have trouble. Rolex is the market. Except, the two-tone Sky Dweller is sitting on gray dealer shelves at prices below its January 2026 retail. Let that settle. The Sky Dweller is Rolex's most complex watch annual calendar, dual time zone, a movement that took years to develop. Technically, it's the most sophisticated thing in most Rolex dealers' cases. The Rolzor version, with its mix of oyster steel and 18-karat gold, has a 2026 MSRP that has been pushed to around $20,500 following Rolex's January price increases. Secondary market? Roughly $18,500, sometimes less. That gap, $2,000 of immediate loss the moment a dealer sells it, is the panic. Gray market dealers who bought inventory in 2024, expecting the Sky Dweller to follow the GMT master trajectory, are underwater. Not catastrophically. But in a business where your capital is tied up in watches worth $20,000 each, even a 10% loss per unit compounds into a serious problem fast. The Rolzor issue is specific. The all-steel Sky Dweller holds value better. The full gold holds value at a different tier. Two-tone occupies an awkward middle, expensive enough to price out the budget-conscious Rolex buyer, not prestigious enough to attract the buyer who wants full precious metal at that investment level. Rolex raised prices. The secondary market didn't follow. Dealers are stuck between a manufacturer's price floor and a market that won't meet it. A Rolex that dealers can't move. That sentence would have been fiction in 2021. The next watch on this list? Another Rolex. And the story is worse. Rolex Sea Dweller Deep Sea Ref 136660. The Deep Sea is the most extreme production watch Rolex makes. Water resistant to 3,900 meters, a depth no human being has ever worn a watch to in the history of voluntary ocean descent. A helium escape valve for saturation divers who will never buy this watch at retail. A case so thick that the watch protrudes almost 2 centimeters from your wrist. At its 2026 retail price of approximately $14,500, the Deep Sea is asking the buyer to pay $14,000 for capabilities they will never use, packaged in a format that has become increasingly difficult to wear as watch culture pivots towards slim, vintage-proportioned pieces. Dealers aren't panicking at the same level as the precious metal pieces higher on this list. But the Deep Sea is moving slowly, noticeably more slowly than the standard Sea Dweller or the Submariner. And gray market premiums that existed 2 years ago have gone flat. The honest version of this entry, the Deep Sea was always a niche product. It sold well during the hype years because everything Rolex sold well during the hype years. Now that the hype is gone and buyers are choosing more deliberately, capable of surviving a depth that would kill everything else on Earth, turns out not to be a strong lifestyle sell. There's also the pure physics problem. The watch is heavy, 12 millimeters thick at the case. It wears like a statement, which is fine if you want to make that statement. Fewer people do. The Deep Sea's secondary market slowdown is a useful canary. It's not dramatic enough to be a headline. Nobody's losing tens of thousands of dollars per unit the way they are with precious metal pieces higher on this list. But the watch community on Watch You Seek has been noting it for over a year. Deep sea listings sitting 60, 90, 120 days. Dealers quietly adjusting their buy prices. The gray market premiums that existed in 2022, sometimes $1,000 to $2,000 above retail, have disappeared entirely. What's left is a watch that makes a very specific promise. I can survive anything. In an era when watch buyers are asking whether a watch looks right at dinner, that promise lands differently than it used to. Somewhere, there's a guy who bought a Deep Sea in 2021 thinking it was the ultimate tool watch and the ultimate flex simultaneously. He's right that it can handle 3,900 meters. The problem is he's at a dinner in Milan, the cuff is hanging awkwardly over it, and the person next to him just clocked a 38mm Vacheron and said nothing, which said everything. That's a Rolex that's simply too much watch for where the culture is. Number 2 on this list? The brand spent years trying to convince you it was in the same conversation as Royal Oak. The market just voted. Number 2. Audemars Piguet Code 11.59 Standard Chronographs. In 2019, Audemars Piguet did something unusual for a brand of its stature. It launched a watch that the internet actively hated on arrival. The code 11.59 was supposed to be AP's answer to a question collectors had been asking for years. What do you make after the Royal Oak? The answer was a circular case inside an octagonal middle case inside a round bezel. A design that looked, and I'm being honest here, like 3 different watches had been assembled into one without anyone agreeing on the concept. The standard steel code 1.59 chronograph currently retails at about $28,800. Secondary market? Somewhere between $18,000 and $22,000, depending on the configuration and the day. A 30% loss the moment it leaves the boutique is not a correction. That's a verdict. Here's the part that makes the code 1.59 story genuinely strange. AP has improved the watch meaningfully since 2019. Better finishing, a reshaped case that photographs better. New dial textures that are actually quite beautiful in person. Technically, it's a more accomplished watch today than it was at launch. The market doesn't care, because the market has already decided. The real damage was done by the way AP boutiques used the code 11.59 as a gatekeeping tool. If you wanted a Royal Oak, you had to first buy a code. This created an enormous pool of unworn Code 1.59s from collectors who bought them purely to satisfy the boutique relationship and then immediately listed them for sale. Chrono 24 at any given moment has hundreds of them, new, unworn, below retail, which tells every potential buyer that this watch does not hold its value, which ensures it doesn't hold its value. They were not losing buyers. They were losing buyers who told other buyers to stay away. Number 2 is a brand in a box of its own making. Number 1, a steel Patek Philippe should have been untouchable. The fact that it's on this list is the most alarming thing in the 2026 watch market. Number 1. Patek Philippe Annual Calendar Chronograph. RE5. 1905 over 1A. Steel Patek Philippe. Let those 3 words sit for a second. For most of watch collecting history, steel Patek was the closest thing the hobby had to a guaranteed outcome. You bought it, it appreciated. Sometimes modestly, sometimes dramatically. The 5,711 Nautilus was the canonical example. Waitlists of years, secondary premiums of 3 or 4 times retail. You bought a steel Patek and you held something. The reference 5,905 over 1A is a steel Patek Philippe Annual Calendar Chronograph. It has an olive green dial, which in 2021 was the most fashionable color in watch collecting. The color that launched 1,000 hype cycles. It combines 2 complications that normally require separate watches. The movement is, as every Patek movement is, quietly extraordinary. The current 2026 retail price is approximately $72,000. Secondary market, about $65,000, give or take. Dealers who bought at the peak, when green dials were commanding premiums and this watch was trading above retail, are sitting on losses in the region of $15,000 per unit. A $15,000 loss on a steel Patek. Say that to someone who watched the watch market between 2018 and 2021, and they will genuinely not believe you. The forces at work are several, and they compound. The olive green dial craze ran out of momentum faster than anyone predicted. The 42mm case, which felt just right in 2020, now feels large against a market that has swung decisively toward 38, 39. Patek's retail price increases, implemented to maintain brand positioning, pushed the MSRP above what the secondary market was willing to pay for a watch that the secondary market already had in oversupply. And here's the observation that I keep coming back to. The 5,905 isn't a bad watch. It's not even close to a bad watch. It is a genuinely brilliant piece of horology with one of the finest annual calendar mechanisms ever put in a steel case. None of that helped. Because in 2026, the watch market isn't evaluating horology. It's evaluating liquidity. A watch that might be worth $60,000 in 2 years is only worth $60,000 today if someone believes in that 2-year outcome. When the market loses faith in the trajectory, the watch becomes what it always technically was, a beautiful, complicated, extremely expensive steel object that tells you the time, the date, the month, and the day of the week. That's extraordinary. It's just not enough anymore, on its own, to hold $72,000 of value in a market that's become very, very suspicious of everything. The watch market panic of 2026 isn't about bad watches. Every watch on this list is technically accomplished. Some of them are genuinely brilliant. The panic is about something simpler and more brutal. The difference between what a dealer paid and what a buyer will offer. For 3 years, that gap didn't exist. Dealers were order takers. Everything moved. The collector who could actually buy at retail was doing the boutique a favor by showing up. Now the favor runs the other way. And dealers are remembering what it feels like to actually need to sell something. The brands that will survive this correction aren't necessarily the ones with the best movements. They're the ones with the most honest relationship between what they charge and what the market believes they're worth. Right now, those two numbers are the same for very few watches on this list. Drop a comment below. Which watch on this list do you actually own? I want to know who's sitting on one of these right now. Like this video and subscribe to this channel for videos like this.